entitled Daughter, publicly calls her single dad a broke loser for refusing to pay for her $150,000 dream wedding. But she never expected him to cut off everything and leave her on her own. By the time my daughter decided I was a broke loser, the damage was already moving. Quietly. Irreversibly. And the worst part wasn't the post, it was realizing she believed every word of it. I'm 44, a single dad, and my daughter Trisha is 23. She's getting married in a couple months to her fiancé, Jerry, who's 26. On paper, that should be one of those milestones a father looks forward to. A proud moment. A full circle kind of thing. Instead, it turned into the moment I finally had to look straight at something I'd spent years avoiding. I had Trisha young, in my early 20s, barely 6 months into my marriage. Not long after she was born, my wife died from an epileptic seizure. One minute I had a family I was still learning how to hold together, and the next I was standing in the wreckage with an infant in my arms and no idea what to do with the rest of my life. So I did what a lot of people do when grief is too big and too shapeless to touch. I worked. I threw myself into my job with a kind of discipline that didn't leave room for thought. My sister helped raise Trisha during the day, and when I got home, I took over. I told myself that if I couldn't give my daughter a mother, I could at least give her security. Comfort. Every advantage I could buy. I worked harder, got promoted, kept climbing, and every extra dollar I made went straight into giving Trisha the kind of life I thought would protect her from pain. That was the lie, I guess. That money could soften loss. That saying yes often enough could make up for all the things life had already taken from her. So, yes, she grew up spoiled, and that is on me. My sister warned me more than once. Actually, more than once is generous. She warned me constantly. Told me I was raising a girl who never heard no, never had to wait, never had to carry disappointment all the way through to the end. I always brushed it off. Trisha was my weak spot. Still is, if I'm being honest. Every time she wanted something, I found a reason to give it to her. I told myself I was doing it out of love. Maybe I was. Maybe I was also doing it out of guilt. Either way, the bill came due last week. Trisha came over and told me she wanted me to pay for her wedding. Not help. Not contribute. Pay for it. The whole thing. And when she laid out the number, I actually thought I'd misheard her. Her budget was around $150,000. She said it casually, like she was talking about table linens or a DJ package. There was this absurd guest list filled with people she barely knew but wanted there for appearances. A luxury venue, multiple food stations, top shelf everything. She wanted a custom designer gown, expensive jewelry, bridesmaid expenses covered, the works. Every sentence came with another zero attached to it. Now, I'm not broke. I've done well for myself. I own my business now and I live comfortably. But there's a difference between being financially stable and being stupid enough to blow up your finances for one day dressed up as a dream. Spending $150,000 on a wedding would hit me hard. Hard enough to disrupt things in ways she clearly hadn't considered and maybe didn't care to. So I told her the truth. Carefully. I said I couldn't pay for something that size, and if that was the wedding she wanted, she'd need to scale it down or contribute to it herself. She went still after that. Not calm. Just still in that dangerous way where you can feel the anger pull back before it comes at you harder. Then she asked if I had a wedding fund set aside for her. I told her yes. I did. $75,000. To me, that was generous. More than generous. I'd been putting money aside because I assumed someday I'd help with a venue or catering, maybe both. I never imagined she'd expect me to underwrite the entire production like I was financing a corporate launch. And honestly, I didn't expect her to get married this young. She and Jerry had only been together a year. If they waited, I could save more. They could save more. They could build something instead of demanding it arrive fully formed. I explained all of that. She didn't hear any of it. What she heard was no. And because she's not used to that word landing, she reacted like I'd betrayed her. She accused me of being selfish. Said if this were some business deal, I wouldn't hesitate to spend the money. Said I cared more about work than about her. Her voice kept sharpening, each sentence cleaner and meaner than the last, until it stopped sounding like disappointment and started sounding like contempt. I didn't know how to explain to her that investing in a business and burning cash on a single event are not the same thing. Not remotely. But I could already see it didn't matter. She wasn't trying to understand me. She was trying to force me. Then she stormed out of my house. I sat there after she left, staring at the doorway like she might come back in and reset the whole conversation. She didn't. The house just got quiet around me, in that way only an empty house can. Too quiet. The kind that makes every thought sound louder. And then I did what I've apparently done for years whenever she pushed hard enough. I folded. I felt guilty. I felt responsible. I replayed the look on her face, the disappointment, the accusation, the disgust. After a while, I convinced myself I could make it work. I decided I'd take out a personal loan to cover the difference. I even called a friend of mine at the bank to start talking through options. My thinking was simple and probably pathetic. I could pay it back over time. And if this was what it took to make my daughter happy, then maybe it was worth the strain. She didn't speak to me for the next 2 days. I figured I'd wait until the loan was finalized before reaching out. I thought maybe when I told her I'd found a way, this whole thing would settle. Maybe she'd cool off. Maybe I'd smooth it over like I always had. Instead, on the 3rd day, she put me on Facebook. And she didn't just vent, she went for blood. She called me a broke loser, said I was selfish, said all I ever cared about was work, that I was never there for her when she was a kid. Then she crossed a line I still can't think about without feeling something turn cold in my chest. She implied her mother might have died because of my negligence. I read that sentence more than once. Not because I didn't understand it, because I did. There are things people say in anger that still leave room to come back from them. That wasn't one of them. That was deliberate. Surgical. She reached for the one wound she knew had never healed and pressed down until it bled. Then somehow, in the same breath, I was still the selfish workaholic who only cared about himself and his business while also being a broke loser. The contradiction didn't matter. The performance did. She wanted an audience. She wanted people to see me the way she'd decided to frame me. And for a second, I swear I couldn't breathe right. I blocked her immediately, not out of anger, out of pure reflex. Like if I didn't, I'd keep reading, keep looking, keep finding out what else she thought of me when there was a crowd to impress. After that, I put my phone down and disappeared for a few hours. Didn't answer calls, didn't check messages, didn't log into anything. I just sat there, then paced, then sat again. The kind of numb that doesn't feel calm. The kind that feels like your system shut something off because it had no other choice. My sister got worried and came by to check on me. The second she walked in, I lost it. I broke down right there in front of her. No speech, no build-up. Just all of it hitting at once. What Trisha wrote, what she implied. The way one post managed to drag up 20 years of grief, guilt, sacrifice, and put it all on trial in a few ugly paragraphs. It cut deeper than I want to admit. Deeper than I was prepared for. The next couple of days were bad. I went to work because I had to, because routine was the only thing keeping me upright. But outside of that, I barely spoke to anyone. Getting out of bed felt heavier than it should have. My sister stayed with me and took care of me, and even then, the house felt like it was holding its breath. Like something worse had already started and I just hadn't seen the full shape of it yet. The first thing I realized was that taking the post down changed nothing. The words were gone, but they had already done what they were supposed to do. Once you hear your child say who she thinks you are, you don't get to unknow it. My sister had called Trisha and forced her to delete the Facebook post, but by then it didn't matter. The screen was clean. I wasn't. I knew exactly what my daughter thought of me when she was angry enough to stop pretending, and that knowledge sat in my chest like a weight I couldn't shift. I couldn't think of a single thing worth saying to her after that, so I said nothing. For days, I kept my distance. I went through the motions at work, came home, ate because my sister put food in front of me, slept badly, woke up tired. The kind of hurt Trisha had landed wasn't loud anymore. It was quieter than that, more humiliating. It followed me into ordinary moments and made even small things feel heavier than they should have. I finally unblocked her yesterday. Not because I was over it, I wasn't, not even close. but I knew I couldn't leave it hanging forever. My sister had already torn into her, and apparently Trisha had heard more than enough from relatives too. Still, none of that felt like it counted. I needed to hear her myself. I needed to know whether there was anything real left underneath all that entitlement and cruelty, or whether that post had been the most honest thing she'd ever said to me. By then, I had already canceled the loan, and I'll admit something ugly here because pretending otherwise would just be another lie. I wanted to hurt her. Not physically, not permanently. But emotionally? Yes. I wanted her to feel some version of what she had done to me. I wanted the comfort she moved through so easily to give way for once. I wanted her to sit with the shock of being cut open by someone she assumed would always keep taking it. I know that's not the kind of thing a father is supposed to say. I know it sounds petty and cruel. Maybe it was. But at that point, I wasn't interested in being noble. I was interested in being understood. So I unblocked her and waited. She called last night. The second I saw her name on my phone, my whole body went tight. I stared at it for a beat too long before answering. And when I did, she launched straight into an apology. Said she was angry. Said she was disappointed. Said she'd said a lot of things she didn't mean because she was upset about not getting the wedding she'd dreamed of. But even while she was apologizing, there was something off in her voice. No softness, no shame, no hesitation. She sounded inconvenienced, like she was reciting the minimum required to get past a problem she didn't want attached to her anymore. The words were right, technically, but the tone underneath them was brittle and impatient. Like she was annoyed this had become such a big deal. That somehow made it worse. I cut her off in the middle of it. I told her I had been working on a way to pay for the wedding, that after our fight, I'd reached out to the bank, that I was planning to take out a personal loan and surprise her by covering what she wanted after all. She went quiet for half a second, then lit up. You could actually hear the shift, the relief, the excitement, the calculation. It was all there in the space before she even spoke. And then I told her I'd canceled it. I said after what she wrote, I wasn't paying a cent toward the wedding. Not the venue, not the dress, not the catering, none of it. If she was as independent as she acted and I was as selfish as she claimed, then she could figure it out herself. She started to say something, I don't even know what, because I didn't let her get there. Everything I'd kept pushed down for days came up all at once. I told her that if she wanted to talk about selfishness, then maybe we should talk about everything I'd paid for since she turned 18. Her college tuition, her off-campus apartment, because dorm life apparently wasn't good enough, her shopping sprees, her trips with friends, the dinners she covered for people because she knew I'd always refill whatever she emptied. I reminded her how many times she'd treated my money like it was just a background utility, like electricity or running water, something she could use without ever thinking about where it came from. And then I said the part I knew would land. I told her I wanted every dime back. That wasn't fair. I knew it while I was saying it. I didn't actually want the money. I wasn't trying to collect on years of support like some bitter accountant. I wanted impact. I wanted her to hear, maybe for the first time in her life, that love was not an endless line of credit. That all the things she treated as automatic had a cost, and maybe now she should feel it. So I kept going. I told her she could pay me back for all of it, and once she did, we'd never have to speak again. She wouldn't have to stay in contact with a broke loser for a father, and I wouldn't have to waste another minute on a spoiled, nasty, ill-mannered brat who thought public humiliation was an acceptable way to get what she wanted. By the time I got to that last part, I was shouting. Not raised voice, not sharp tone. Full-on shouting into the phone like every swallowed feeling from the last 23 years had found an opening and rushed it at once. Grief, guilt, exhaustion, resentment, the humiliation of that post, the years of saying yes because it felt easier than being the bad guy. All of it was in my throat, and once it started coming out, I couldn't control the shape of it. Then I hung up. I dropped back onto the couch and just sat there, breathing hard, staring at nothing, trying to come down from it. My hands were shaking, my chest hurt. The room felt too warm and too bright. There was this awful silence after, the kind that makes you hear exactly what you just did. My sister had stepped out of the kitchen when she heard me yelling. She'd caught enough of it to understand what happened, including the part where I told Trisha to pay me back. In the immediate aftermath, she didn't say much. She just looked at me for a long second with that expression people get when they're deciding where to even begin. Then she went quiet and let it sit. She waited until dinner. That was deliberate, too. We were halfway through eating when she finally set her fork down and said, very calmly, that I was acting like Trisha had turned into this person in a vacuum. She told me I was just as responsible for the way my daughter turned out as Trisha was for her own behavior. Maybe more? Because she didn't raise herself. I did. There wasn't any heat in her voice. That was what made it worse. She said I couldn't spend years spoiling a child, shielding her from consequences, rewarding every demand, and then suddenly act shocked when that child grew up believing other people existed to fund her feelings. I had done this, she said. I had created a system where Trisha always won eventually, and now I was horrified, because for the first time, her cruelty had my name on it. I tried to interrupt, but my sister kept going. She said if I'd handled this like an adult, I would have cut Trisha off until she came back with a real apology. Not a panicked one. Not a convenient one made because family members were tearing her apart, and some of her more sensible friends were probably telling her she'd gone way too far. A genuine apology. One without attitude. One that cost her something. Instead, I had waited just long enough to weaponize my own pain and throw it back at her. And then she said the part I couldn't really argue with. She reminded me of all the times Trisha had been awful to other people over the years. Relatives, friends, people in service jobs, anyone she thought was beneath her or in her way. My sister said I'd seen it. I'd always seen it. Maybe I'd scold her here and there, but never in a way that mattered. Never with consequences. Never with any real conviction, because as long as the damage was landing somewhere outside me, I kept telling myself she'd grow out of it. But now she wasn't doing it to strangers anymore. Now she was doing it to me. And according to my sister, that was the only reason I was finally willing to call it what it was. Which meant there was no one left to blame but myself. She said I still had a chance to handle this the right way, to let Trisha sit in what she'd done and come to her senses on her own. Instead, I got angry. And once I did, there was no taking back how far I'd gone. I'm carrying the tension straight through and making sure this section still climbs instead of cooling off. I'm also preserving the update structure without letting it feel like the story resets. And that was the part that stayed with me after the anger burned off. Not what Trisha had done. Not even what I'd said. It was the sick realization that I'd answered her exactly the way she would have answered me. My sister said I'd been vindictive, needlessly cruel. That instead of drawing a line and letting silence do its work, I'd grabbed the sharpest thing I could find and thrown it back at my own daughter. At dinner, I didn't agree with her. I was still too angry, too busy defending myself. I left half my food on the table and walked away. But shame lasts longer than anger. By the next morning, with a cooler head, I could see what she meant. I had given Trisha a way to stop thinking about what she posted and start focusing on my reaction instead. Now she could point to me yelling, to me demanding money, to me saying maybe we should never speak again. I had handed her a way to feel righteous. That realization was hard to sit with. I still don't think all of this is entirely my fault. Trisha is 23. She makes her own decisions. I didn't teach her to weaponize her dead mother in an argument about money. I didn't teach her to humiliate people in public when they don't give her what she wants. But if I'm being honest, I also didn't teach her not to. I didn't stop it when it first showed up. I didn't make consequences real. So when I asked myself whether I was to blame for spoiling my daughter, I think what I was really asking was whether neglect still counts when it looks like generosity. The first thing I did was apologize to my sister. She's the only person looking out for me right now, and she deserved better than the way I stormed off on her. More than that, she was right. I just didn't want to admit it because once I did, I had to face something uglier than Trisha's behavior, my own failure as a father. Looking back, I can see how often I let things slide when Trisha was cruel to other people. Relatives, friends, waiters, cashiers, anyone she thought she could talk down to. I'd correct her just enough to feel like I'd done something, but never enough for it to matter. No real punishment, no real lesson. I kept telling myself she'd grow out of it. She didn't. And now that same ugliness finally landed on me, and suddenly I had no choice but to see the full shape of the person I helped create. I still haven't spoken to her since that phone call, and she hasn't reached out either. Maybe that's pride. Maybe she still thinks I owe her the first move. Either way, I'm not doing it. What she said was too cruel and too deliberate to smooth over because a few days passed. If she wants any relationship with me at all, she can start with a real apology, not one she offers because relatives are tearing her apart. Not one she gives because the wedding budget is collapsing. A real one. The problem is, I don't know if she has one in her. My sister says this should have been my approach from the start. The second Trisha made that post, I should have gone silent and let her sit in the consequences of what she'd done. I agree with that now. That phone call didn't fix anything. It just forced me to admit something I've been avoiding for years. After my wife died, I made Trisha the center of everything. I wanted her life padded on every side. I didn't want her growing up feeling like other kids had something she didn't. So I overcompensated. I gave her things when I should have given her boundaries. I gave her rescue when I should have given her consequences. I was so focused on making sure she never felt deprived that I stopped doing the harder parts of parenting altogether. Maybe that was selfish in its own way. What's done is done. I don't actually want any money back from her. I never did. When I told her to repay me, I wanted her to feel some version of what she'd made me feel. I needed to get it out of my system. I don't regret that entirely, but I know I could have said it without sounding like I was trying to erase my own daughter. Even so, I'm not apologizing first, so I stayed silent. Then, about 4 days later, I got a payment from Trisha for $22,000. No message, no explanation. Just the money showing up in my account like we were strangers settling a debt. I told my sister, and she immediately said this had to be about what I told Trisha on the phone. She was repaying me, or at least starting to. That should have made me feel something. Instead, it made my stomach turn. Because even then, she still wasn't apologizing. She wasn't calling, wasn't acknowledging what she'd done. She was just reducing years of support into a number she could transfer and be done with, like if she paid enough, then none of it meant anything anymore. So I sent it back. I don't want her money. I don't need it. What I wanted was remorse. One honest sentence. One sign that she understood what she did. And if I was never going to get that, then I didn't want a payment pretending to be closure. She didn't send it back again right away. A few hours passed, then my phone rang. It was Trisha. When I answered, her voice was flat in a way that made anger sound almost warm. She said she was doing exactly what I had asked her to do, and I needed to stop making things more difficult by turning this into a bigger issue than it already was. I told her I didn't want the money, that I'd only said those things because I wanted her to feel as bad as she'd made me feel. She could keep it. I meant that. But she pushed back immediately. And then, in that same cold tone, she told me that after the way I've got the next section mapped so it keeps climbing. The call hardens into a stalemate, then the breakup shifts the pressure without giving anyone relief. I'm making sure it ends with the next emotional turn already in motion. The call turned colder after that, not softer. By then, neither of us was trying to fix anything. We were fighting over who had the right to stay hurt. Trisha said that after the way I'd insulted her on the phone, she didn't feel comfortable owing me money anymore. I used the same logic right back on her. I told her that after the Facebook post, after she called me a selfish, broke loser in front of everyone, I didn't feel comfortable taking money from her either. If I accepted it, I said, I'd just be confirming exactly what she already believed about me. That bought me a few seconds of silence. Then she sighed and said she didn't know what I wanted her to say anymore. She was exhausted from dealing with my weird behavior. That word bothered me more than it should have. Weird. As if this whole mess was me being dramatic, so I told her that was exactly how I felt about her. I was exhausted too, and once again, we went quiet. Deadlocked. A few seconds later, she said that if I wanted a genuine conversation about our problems, she was ready to have one. But if I was going to keep acting like this, She didn't see how we were ever going to work anything out. I told her I didn't want a discussion. I wanted an apology. A real one. Not a conversation where she got to spread the blame around until we somehow landed in the same place. If she was ready to apologize, we could talk. Otherwise, I had nothing to say to her. Then I hung up. No follow-up text, no second payment, nothing. For the first time in a long time, I forced myself to leave the next move to her. A couple of days later, the whole situation shifted anyway. My sister was the one who told me. She still hears things from relatives, and apparently Jerry had posted on social media that he and Trisha had broken up. I never saw it myself, but according to everyone else, the post made it sound mutual, clean, respectful. One of those polished statements people put out when they want to control the story before the truth gets there. I didn't buy it. If it had really been mutual, Trisha wouldn't have deactivated all her accounts within an hour of his post. People don't vanish that fast when everything is calm, so something had happened. I just didn't know what. My sister had theories, and every single one of them somehow circled back to my fight with Trisha. She thought maybe the wedding money, the Facebook post, all the pressure around it had spilled into their relationship and blown it up. I didn't think so. Their relationship had always felt rushed to me. Too much intensity packed into too little time. But I've been wrong about enough lately that I couldn't rule anything out. What I did know was that the second I heard they'd broken up, I wanted to call my daughter. That instinct came back immediately, which was almost embarrassing. After everything she'd said, after that post, after the phone call, my first reaction was still to make sure she was okay. I wanted to drive over. I wanted to know if she was alone. I wanted to do what I've always done and step in before the hurt settled too deep. I didn't. I couldn't do that without pretending nothing else had happened. Without becoming the same version of me that had helped create this whole mess in the first place. So I stayed out of it. Then I found out what actually happened between Trisha and Jerry, and it was bad. The only relief in it is that it had nothing to do with me. My sister was wrong about that, and I'm glad she was. I didn't have to ask Trisha either. She told me herself. A couple of days ago, she reached out and explained everything. For the record, we are still not on good terms. I don't even know what kind of terms we're on right now. Not reconciled. Not exactly hostile. Just unstable, like one wrong sentence could tip us right back into something ugly. Still, she told me the truth. She and Jerry had only been together for about a year. They met through mutual friends. What I didn't know was that when Jerry first met her, he was already seeing someone else. According to Trisha, he claimed he broke up with that woman soon after, and then about a month later he and Trisha started dating. Only that wasn't true. A couple months into the relationship, Trisha found out he'd been seeing both of them at the same time. He never really ended it with his ex when he said he did. He was just juggling both and hoping the timing didn't catch up with him. They fought about it, but she stayed. She made him promise he'd cut all contact with the ex. Not long after that, he proposed. At the time, she took that as proof that he was serious, that he was choosing her, that everything before that was over. Looking back, it sounds a lot more like damage control. She admitted to me that one reason she pushed the wedding so hard, so fast, was because she wanted the marriage locked in before his ex could drift back into the picture. She wanted something official, permanent, something public enough that he couldn't back out quietly. But recently she found out he'd been using a secret phone to keep talking to his ex the entire time. That was the end of it. She broke things off a couple days ago. Jerry begged her not to go public with the cheating, because if his family found out the truth, they'd cut him off financially. So she agreed not to say anything publicly, and that's why they put out the mutual breakup story instead. She told me she'd been suspicious for a while. That was why she'd been so edgy since the engagement. So tense. So quick to explode. And when I told her I couldn't pay for the wedding she wanted, all that pressure had to land somewhere. It landed on me. And once she started talking, I could hear it underneath everything. The humiliation, the panic, the rage of someone who had been trying to force a happy ending before the truth caught up. Which made what she said next hit even harder. What she said next should have felt like relief. Instead, it landed like a bruise. Because by then, too much had already broken, and apologies don't arrive in one piece. They come dragging everything behind them. Trisha admitted that when I told her I wouldn't pay for the wedding, she was already unraveling. She said the stress with Jerry had been building for months, that she'd been living with this constant suspicion that he was still lying to her, still hiding something. And when I pushed back on the wedding money, all of that frustration spilled straight onto me. She said she knew that wasn't fair. She knew she'd taken the ugliest part of herself and aimed it at the one person who had always been there. Then she said she hadn't meant any of it. Not the broke loser comment, not the selfishness, not the things she implied about her mother. She said those words came from the worst side of her, the side that shows up when she feels cornered and angry and humiliated. She wasn't trying to defend it. She was just trying to explain how something that cruel had made it out of her mouth at all. Toward the end of the message, she apologized. Not in that clipped, irritated tone from before. Not like someone trying to get past a problem. This time it read differently. Slower. More exposed. She said she was truly sorry for everything she'd said to me. She said she didn't expect me to forgive her right away, and she understood if I couldn't just forget it. But she hoped that someday we could reconcile. She said she was going to try to be a better daughter and, in general, a better person. I stared at that message for a long time without replying. Because the truth was, I felt bad for her, but I also felt bad for myself, and those two things did not cancel each other out. My daughter had been the most important person in my life for more than 2 decades. Every major decision I made, every sacrifice, every compromise had somehow bent around her. And now I was sitting there reading an apology that came after one of the ugliest fights we'd ever had, trying to figure out whether I was grieving what happened or grieving the version of us I thought had existed before it. I knew I was going to answer her eventually. I wanted to. I wanted to clear the air. I wanted her to know that even after all of this, even after the post and the phone call and everything that followed, I still loved her in the most stubborn way possible. I still wanted her safe. I still wanted her to know that if life came apart around her, I would show up. I just didn't know how to say that without also telling the truth, which was that she had damaged something between us. Maybe not beyond repair, but enough that I couldn't pretend we could just step back into the old pattern and call it healing. It took time. Longer than I expected. A lot longer, actually. I ended up staying away from all of it for a while, including Reddit, because I didn't want to keep narrating a relationship while I was still trying to understand whether it could be saved. But I can say this now. Trisha and I did reconcile. Not all at once. Not with one emotional phone call and a dramatic reset. It happened in smaller pieces than that. A few careful conversations, some uncomfortable silences. More honesty than we were both used to. She apologized to me properly, and this time I believed her. I forgave her, partly because I wanted to, and partly because by then she was already miserable enough that piling onto it would have felt less like justice and more like cruelty. She told me what Jerry had done had messed with her badly. Not just because he cheated, but because she had spent months trying to force herself to believe in something she knew. Deep down was rotten. She said that pressure made her meaner, more volatile, more reckless. But she also said that wasn't an excuse. She knew she had been difficult long before Jerry. She knew she had a pattern of lashing out, controlling people and treating kindness like something owed to her. And then, to her credit, she said something I didn't expect. She said I was partly responsible for that. Not because I hurt her, but because I never corrected her. I never really punished her. I never did the hard, unglamorous parts of parenting that might have helped shape her into somebody softer, humbler, more accountable. Hearing that from her hurt, mostly because it was true. But I also think it mattered that she could finally see it too, not as a way to dump blame on me, but as part of the full picture. So now we're trying. That's the simplest way to put it. We're trying to rebuild something healthier than what we had before. Not just warmer, healthier. The old version of our relationship was built on guilt, overcompensation, and me confusing indulgence with love. Neither of us wants to go back to that. We both know we need something better if this is going to last. I don't want to give up on her, and at least now, she says she doesn't want to give up on me either. As for Jerry, that situation got uglier before it was over. Once Trisha and I were talking again, I told her I thought she should tell the truth publicly. He had asked her to protect him by keeping quiet about the cheating, but he'd already broken every promise he made to her. I told her she didn't owe him loyalty just because he wanted to keep his image intact. If anything, the person who needed to feel exposed was him. At first, she hesitated. I think part of her still wanted to avoid more chaos. But eventually, on my insistence, she posted what had really happened, and it blew up exactly the way you'd expect. They ended up in a nasty online fight, and whatever doubt people had about him didn't last long. The more he talked, the worse he looked. Defensive, slippery, arrogant. It only made his character clearer. Trisha wasn't in the wrong there, and most people saw that. Of course, there were still a few women who clearly never liked her and jumped at the chance to trash her anyway, but that was background noise more than anything else. What mattered was that she stopped protecting someone who had been actively humiliating her. Later, she told me she was glad I pushed her to tell the truth. She said Jerry needed to be taken down, and she was relieved she finally stopped covering for him. I agreed. So that's where things stand now. I'm not going to pretend everything is perfect because it isn't. We're still early in this. There are still awkward moments. There are still things neither of us has fully unpacked. But for the first time in a long while, it feels like we're moving in the right direction instead of just reacting to each other's wounds. She's in therapy now, which honestly was overdue. She says she wants to become a better person, and I believe she means that. Maybe because for once she's not saying it to get something. She's saying it because she finally sees the damage. And if I'm being honest, I probably needed this too. Both of us did. We don't know exactly what the future looks like from here. There's too much history for that. Too much damage, too much guilt, too many habits that don't disappear just because you name them. But we do know this much. Neither of us is walking away without trying. And after everything that happened, that feels a lot more serious and a lot more fragile than any promise we could have made before.